All right, here this morning with Liz Brazile and Ashley Hiruko, journalists with KUOW. See the headline right here. It says, "This Auburn cop killed 3 and injured others. His department didn't stop him. Outsiders did." Tell me about it.
Yeah, so Liz Brazile and I wanted to explore kind of, this officer at Auburn PD. He's killed 3 people. He's being charged now for his most recent killing in Washington State. And so we explored kind of his background, other instances of force that he's used. And what we found is that it wasn't just these 3 cases in which Jeffrey Nelson used, a disproportionate amount of force. It was like in his daily conduct as a canine officer. It also explored other issues within the department, just like we spoke to former detectives who said that there's sexual harassment happening there, that misogyny, negligent leadership. And this all kind of came to light in this report that came out when a consulting firm went there too. So that's basically our story in a nutshell.
And Nelson, for people that don't know, Officer Nelson is now on trial, right, for murder?
Yes.
The trial hasn't started yet, but he will be on trial, presumably within, sometime in the coming months. We were told that it could be up to a year, though, because, King County is experiencing a backlog right now of trials. So we'll have to report more on that later.
Right. And I guess I'll go to you first, Ashley. What were some of the real interesting things that just jumped out? I know you hit on them lightly, but what were some of the things in going through all of these reports and information that jumped out at you like, wow?
I mean, I guess in like instances of where he was accused of telling a juvenile when he was being detained, like, I hope you don't get raped, like things like that really jumped out to me. Like complaints like that were kind of, this officer said, well, it didn't happen. It was kind of like shrugged off and swept under the rug. There was an instance where Jeffrey Nelson, and he admitted to doing this, he saw a man jaywalking and the man ran away, and Officer Nelson ended up tasing him. And this is without knowing outside of jaywalking if this man had done anything else. He just saw him jaywalking. And so it was just things like that really stood out to me. And also, I think I really wanted to explore, and we really want to explore as a team, kind of the culture there. Like, how does this kind of force, happen day to day? Like, who's watching this? What is the culture there that allows this kind of default to violence persist? Because you saw that in his reports that he would document himself, that he was saying, I used this much force for a man that was jaywalking, or I put this man in a chokehold and this man was drunk and he shoulder checked me. So, I mean, that's really what stuck out to me, I think.
Liz, what was the culture that you guys have found there at the Auburn Police Department?
Yeah, so when we dug in, we found that the department had actually hired a group of consultants to come in and study the issues that they were experiencing with officer retention. And along the way, what the group found was that there was a big problem with discipline. There was no real system for disciplining officers. It was kind of that discipline was doled out on a case-by-case basis and kind of at the whim of superiors to dole out, not in a very objective way. And so that's how you ended up with an officer like Jeffrey Nelson, who, even though there were actual findings of misconduct by his superiors, he was able to kind of get off scot-free with just a so-called letter of counseling, which is not considered, an actual disciplinary mechanism, but more so just kind of outlining what the misconduct was and how to do better and not, repeat those mistakes. But as we saw, those letters of counseling, if you put 2 and 2 together, it didn't really seem to yield much of, corrective behavior on his part.
Right. In speaking more about the actual Auburn Police Department, Ashley, there was an email that was sent to us that talked about a culture of sexual harassment down there. Did you guys uncover anything down there?
I mean, I won't speak too much on that, but yes, there has been instances of sexual harassment there, and I was told, by folks that I talked to that are no longer working there, that is the case. But I don't want to go too much into that, just because, yeah.
Right. Now, Liz, how does 940 play into this? And if 940 wasn't on the books, would Nelson be facing murder for Jesse Soray?
So the way that the King County prosecutor kind of presented this case when they announced that they would be charging Nelson, who, by the way, he's charged with second-degree murder and first-degree assault, each charge representing the 2 times that he shot Jesse Sari. But the issue at play right now is 940 introduces a new standard for charging deadly force cases, because before it was that, an officer, as long as they demonstrated that they acted in, so-called good faith, and like that they did, or rather that they didn't act with malice in, using deadly force, they would not be held criminally liable for using deadly force. And so, now the standard has changed to, the officers needing to demonstrate that they did act in good faith, but also, there's a more objective standard, presumably objective. We'll have to see how it plays out in reality, but the standard is that would a reasonable officer have used deadly force in that situation? And so I think what we're seeing now is prosecutors, applying that standard of Initiative 940 are seeing, they made the determination that in the case that Nelson was charged in, his use of deadly force would not have been reasonable. And so that's the case that they're arguing, or will be arguing, when he takes the stand on trial.
Right. And Ashley, do you think that what you uncovered there at the Auburn Police Department is unique to that police department? I know you guys are looking at a kind of use of force across the county.
You mean the culture there, or what specifically?
Right. The culture.
I think that it's not all police departments. I have talked with like people who know all the police departments, like public defenders who kind of have done this at more at length, studied the culture at these different departments, or what they've heard. And I think that like Auburn is definitely not alone, but it's not every department, I wouldn't say. But this kind of culture, like that toxicity of it, I don't think it's just at Auburn itself. I think that this is what happens when you allow this, you have leadership in place that allows this kind of culture to transpire and continue and persist. So.
Right. And in reading your article, it seems like as well when you talk about the culture, a lot of times if what the officers are saying is like, hey, I just do what I'm trained. I just do what the culture says, or, I just kind of go within the guidelines of my department. And it seems like that might also be reinforcing in some of the behaviors. Liz, I wanted to shoot over to you. I saw that in the article that there was a federal public defender 8 years ago, was it? Either 8 years ago or 4 years ago, who looked at some of these cases and wrote that Officer Nelson had a penchant for violence. Why do you think that even though there was documented cases here where other people had looked at this particular officer, that really nothing was done besides this letter that you talked about?
Yeah, I might punt to Ashley in a few because she really dug into that piece. But what I'll say is that I think you're talking about an agency. When it comes to policing, these systems largely regulate themselves, and then that is just inherently problematic because they're not going to have as objective of insight into what the problems are. Hence why that consultant group was called in to really examine what was going on with the Auburn Police Department. But speaking for, Hamudi, who was the public defender that dug into Nelson's past, he was actually representing a man who Nelson rammed his car into and really injured badly during an arrest. And I think, with those records uncovered was, Hamudi, his point mainly was, in terms of the department, was that, Nelson was coming from a military background. He's a military veteran. And his argument was that the Auburn Police Department really did not properly consider the fact that someone who was coming back or who was transitioning to a career in law enforcement after being a combat veteran would need, special consideration in their training and, how to kind of transition them over to a career in law enforcement. And so that was one of the failures that he highlighted as far as Auburn Police Department goes as a system. And Ashley, did you want to add anything?
I just want to say that I think that like the fact that Muhammad Ali Hamoudi was sounding the alarm about this man a couple years back before he was charged, and the fact that no one was really kind of watching this just says that we have a system in where for a long time we've allowed police to police themselves instead of having some kind of oversight mechanisms in place. Yeah, I think that's basically it. It's just like, I know I-940 has kind of introduced more mechanisms in place to kind of give watch, but before that, we've just had police policing police and hoping that they would do the right thing.
All right, before we get out of here, Ashley, I'll throw it to you. Is there anything else in the article that we didn't talk about in this interview that you want the public to know?
Not specifically. I know that Liz wanted to I believe Liz had mentioned earlier something that she wanted to say about kind of how the state does oversight.
Yeah.
Liz?
So one thing that we noticed as we were researching for this story, there is no state mandate right now on reporting deadly force. So even though I-940 exists, and part of it is it changes the standard for which, prosecutors can hold officers criminally liable in deadly force cases. But the issue is that these deadly force cases are not required to be reported publicly. So, unless these cases just happen to pop on someone's radar, the public really has no way of knowing in a systematic way, like when these deadly force cases even exist. And so Attorney General Bob Ferguson actually put out a report this past summer examining that. And so we expect for the fact that, there's no law on the books mandating, reporting of deadly force cases, that's probably going to be a big issue the next legislative session to watch.
All right. So I'll put this back up here. People can view this right now, KUOW.org. Real important article here. This Auburn cop killed 3 and injured others. His department didn't stop him. Outsiders did. Liz Brazile, Ashley Hiruko from KUOW, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having us.